I spent years saving lives, but when I came home, I couldn't even save my own marriage. My wife was hiding something: large withdrawals from our account, late-night disappearances, and a secret lover. But the worst part: the children I raised might not even be mine. And when I finally uncovered the truth, she did the unthinkable: she tried to destroy me. But she forgot one thing. I don't go down without a fight. The thick fog clung to the highway, swallowing the road ahead in a gray haze. Adrian Wells gripped the steering wheel of the ambulance, his focus sharp despite the exhaustion gnawing at his edges. The radio crackled: another emergency, a multi-car accident with unknown casualties. The moment the call came in, his body responded automatically, pushing aside fatigue, replacing it with duty. As the ambulance rounded the bend, the wreckage unfolded like a scene from a nightmare. Twisted metal, shattered glass, the acrid scent of burning rubber mixed with the distant wail of sirens. Damon Reyes, his partner, muttered a curse under his breath before reaching for the radio. Adrian was already moving, stepping out of the vehicle with practiced urgency. His eyes scanned the wreckage. A silver sedan caught his attention, what remained of it. The hood crumpled in on itself, steam curling from beneath the twisted frame. Then, a sound cut through the chaos. A cry, high, desperate. A woman's voice. The shattered driver's side window revealed a woman trapped inside, her hair matted with blood, her breath coming in sharp gasps. The sheer panic in her wide eyes sent a surge of urgency through Adrian's veins. She was pregnant. The impact had pinned her, her swollen belly pressed against the steering wheel. The reality of the situation settled in instantly. There was no time to wait. The contractions had already begun. Adrian moved with precision, assessing the damage while his mind calculated the next steps. The baby was coming. Right here. Right now. No sterile operating room, no ideal conditions, just asphalt, flashing lights, and the constant hum of approaching responders. The minutes that followed blurred into sharp moments of movement. Damon assisted without question, retrieving the necessary tools while Adrian prepared for the inevitable. Each step was deliberate, his hands steady even as the air around them buzzed with tension. The woman's breathing grew erratic, her body trembling with pain and exhaustion. The pressure in Adrian's chest deepened, there was no space for hesitation. Then, a single cry broke through the night. Adrian lifted the tiny infant, relief flooding his system. The child's cries were strong, filling the air like a declaration of survival. Carefully, he placed the newborn against the mother's chest, watching as the fear in her eyes melted into something softer, something raw and real. It was only then that Adrian became aware of the crowd. Fellow paramedics, officers, even the accident's less injured victims had gathered in silence, watching the scene unfold. The weight of their gazes didn't register, not in that moment. This was why he did it. Not for the recognition. Not for the praise. But for this. The moments where life triumphed over chaos. The applause at the hospital had been overwhelming. His colleagues called him a hero, his name circulating through local news stations as the paramedic who had delivered a baby on the roadside. But none of it mattered when he finally stepped into his house later that night, the door closing behind him with an eerie finality. Silence greeted him. No laughter, no familiar warmth. His wife, Lena, wasn't home. Adrian set his keys down, his muscles aching from the day's work. It wasn't unusual for Lena to be out, but something felt different. He couldn't shake the unease creeping beneath his skin. In the dim glow of the kitchen, the answering machine blinked. A single message. Without thinking, he pressed play. The voice on the other end was unfamiliar, formal, polite. "Mr. Wells, this is Danielle Carter from First State Bank. We're calling to verify some recent large withdrawals from your joint account. If you could get back to us at your earliest convenience." Adrian's grip tightened around the countertop. Large withdrawals? His mind worked through the details. He hadn't touched the account beyond the usual bills. His fingers moved on instinct, pulling out his phone, logging into their online banking. Each transaction stood out like a red flag, thousands withdrawn, untraceable expenses, and buried among them, high-end hotel charges. Hotels. A hollow feeling settled in his chest. His mind replayed the last few months, Lena's vague explanations, the distance in her eyes, the late nights that never quite added up. He needed proof. The decision came swiftly, his movements precise as he installed the small, nearly invisible security cameras throughout the house. Not out of paranoia. Not out of suspicion. But for clarity. For confirmation. By the time he finished, the exhaustion that had clung to him earlier had disappeared, replaced by something colder, sharper. Lena had always known how to keep secrets. But Adrian had spent his career uncovering the truth. And this time would be no different. The following days passed in slow, measured silence. Adrian Wells moved through them with the same precision he used in the field, observing, calculating, waiting. His work remained steady, each shift at the hospital filled with urgency, but the weight in his chest refused to lift. Lena's behavior didn't change. She still left the house at odd hours, still offered vague explanations. If anything, she had grown more careful, her routine structured in a way that suggested she thought she was covering her tracks. But Adrian had the cameras now. It didn't take long. The footage played out in muted betrayal, Lena moving through their home as if nothing had changed, her phone always in hand, the frequent glances toward the front door, the way she lingered near the window as if waiting for someone. And then, the proof he had both anticipated and dreaded. A car pulling into their driveway. A man stepping out, his posture too familiar, too comfortable. Adrian sat motionless as he watched the scene unfold, Lena opening the door, the way her body leaned toward the man instinctively, the way their hands brushed, the silent exchange of understanding between them. The man was Elliot Vaughn, someone Adrian recognized instantly. A pharmaceutical rep who had been lingering around the hospital for months, always too friendly, too present. The puzzle pieces snapped together, forming a picture Adrian wished he could unsee. He didn't need more evidence. But he kept recording. The Wells family barbecue had been a long-standing tradition, a gathering meant to reinforce bonds, to remind everyone that no matter how busy life became, family remained. This year was no different. Laughter echoed through the backyard, the scent of grilled food filling the air as relatives swapped stories and clinked drinks together. Adrian moved through the crowd with practiced ease, offering nods and half-hearted smiles. His mind wasn't here. It was still in his home office, replaying the footage, the whispers of Lena's betrayal woven into every moment. She stood across the yard, engaged in conversation with his sister Valerie, her laugh light, effortless. Watching her, Adrian almost believed nothing had changed. Almost. Then, the disturbance came. A figure at the gate, stumbling forward, loud and reckless. Elliot Vaughn. The conversation around them dulled as people turned, the air thickening with unspoken tension. He was drunk, obvious from the uneven sway in his stance, the way his words slurred before they fully formed. Lena's entire body went rigid. Elliot ignored the watching eyes, focused only on her. "I don't know why you're still pretending," he said, voice too loud, unfiltered by shame. "Tell them, Lena. Tell them the truth." Silence stretched across the yard. Adrian felt every heartbeat like a hammer against his ribs. Lena didn't speak. Elliot let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head before turning toward Adrian. "You're a damn fool," he muttered. "Did you really think she was waiting for you? That she wasn't already building a new life?" No one moved. The weight of the moment pressed against every watching soul, the betrayal unraveling in real time. And then, the final blow. Elliot's voice, thick with cruel amusement. "Ever wonder why your kids don't look like you?" A roaring sound filled Adrian's ears. The world tilted, his vision narrowing to nothing but the man before him. Somewhere in the background voices rose, shocked gasps, hushed murmurs, but they barely registered. Adrian didn't strike him. Didn't react with the anger pulsing in his veins. Instead, he reached into his pocket, fingers closing around the small recording device he had carried with him, the one that had been running since the barbecue started. He pressed the button, the weight of proof now resting in his hands. Elliot's expression flickered, confusion, then realization, then panic. Adrian exhaled slowly, his voice quiet, unwavering. "Thanks for the confession." The gathering ended in fractured silence. Family members whispered as they left, unsure of what to say, what to believe. Lena stood near the house, pale, her hands trembling against her sides. Adrian didn't speak to her. Didn't look at her. Instead, he turned, walking inside without a word. The war had begun. The quiet in the house was heavier than ever. Adrian Wells moved through it like a ghost, each step deliberate, every breath measured. The fallout from the barbecue had sent shockwaves through the family, whispers of betrayal, stolen glances, uneasy silences. But none of that mattered now. His focus was singular, securing his future and protecting what was his. The divorce filing came first. Arthur Monroe, his attorney, didn't bother with sympathy, just facts, strategies, and a plan of attack. The evidence Adrian provided was damning: financial records, hotel charges, security footage, and now, Elliot's drunken confession. There was no room for denial, no space for manipulation. Then came the custody battle. That was where Lena struck back. Her legal team wasted no time building their defense, twisting reality to fit a different narrative. They painted Adrian as an absent father, a man consumed by his work, too emotionally distant to provide stability. The irony wasn't lost on him. He had spent years saving lives, only to return home to a life that had been dismantled in his absence. Then, the attacks turned personal. Anonymous articles began circulating online, questioning Adrian's competency as a paramedic. Is the hero of Chicago really as perfect as he seems? The headlines were vague, but the damage was calculated. The stories pulled from minor complaints, routine protocol reviews, small moments twisted into something more sinister. At first, he ignored them. Then, they escalated. Hospital administrators began receiving inquiries about his behavior, whether he had ever made dangerous calls, whether his personal life was interfering with his judgment. The whispers followed him down the halls, side glances from colleagues, cautious tones in conversations that once felt normal. Adrian recognized the strategy. Lena and Elliot weren't just fighting for custody. They were trying to destroy him. The final blow came through a different source. His sister Valerie called late one evening, her voice strained. "She's going to frame you," she said. "I overheard her talking to Elliot. They're planning to plant something in your gear, meds, something illegal. If it works, it'll ruin your career and your case." Adrian sat in silence, gripping the phone tightly. He had expected lies. Expected deception. But this was war. The next morning, he walked into Lakewood Medical Center with the same calm precision he had carried into every emergency scene. His locker sat untouched, the familiar weight of his equipment exactly where it should be. But now, he knew what to look for. Dr. Evelyn Carter, the hospital's chief of emergency medicine, met him in her office before his shift. The conversation was brief but direct. "We're setting up surveillance," she said. "If they try anything, we'll catch them." She didn't ask if the accusations were true. She already knew the answer. Hours later, Adrian watched the footage from a small security room, his heart steady despite the fire burning in his chest. Lena entered first, hesitant, glancing around before unzipping his medic bag. A second later, Elliot followed, slipping a small vial into a side pocket. The entire exchange lasted no more than 30 seconds. Then they left, walking away as if they hadn't just attempted to dismantle the life Adrian had built. He exhaled. The final nail in their coffin had just been hammered in. When the police arrived later that evening, Adrian didn't go home. He stayed at the station, giving his statement, detailing every manipulation, every move they had made. By the time Lena and Elliot were placed under arrest for evidence tampering and attempted fraud, Adrian felt nothing. No anger, no satisfaction, just the quiet relief of knowing the storm was finally breaking. But the war wasn't over. Not yet. The courtroom was silent, tension pressing against the walls like an unspoken weight. Adrian Wells sat at the plaintiff's table, his posture straight, expression unreadable. Across from him, Lena and Elliot sat side by side, their attorney whispering frantically, flipping through pages of a crumbling defense. The walls were closing in on them. Judge Miriam Holloway adjusted her glasses, her sharp gaze cutting through the stale air. "This court has reviewed the evidence presented," she began, her voice even, deliberate. "The allegations of infidelity, financial misconduct, and attempts at fraud have been thoroughly documented." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Adrian remained still. The prosecution had built its case methodically. Arthur Monroe, his attorney, had presented everything: bank statements, security footage, and most damning of all, the surveillance video of Lena and Elliot planting stolen medical supplies in Adrian's work bag. That had been their fatal mistake. Their lawyer attempted damage control, arguing stress, emotional turmoil, anything to explain away their actions. But the facts were clear, and Judge Holloway wasn't interested in excuses. The custody battle had been just as ruthless. Lena's attorneys had tried to shift the focus, painting Adrian as emotionally detached, consumed by his work, absent in his children's lives. But testimony from teachers, neighbors, even Dr. Evelyn Carter, had shattered that argument. Their mother was too preoccupied with her personal affairs to provide a stable home, Dr. Carter had stated firmly. Adrian Wells has demonstrated unwavering dedication, not just to his career, but to his children. Lena hadn't expected that. She hadn't expected her lies to be dissected so efficiently, so publicly. And then, the final piece. The DNA test results. Elliot's confession at the barbecue had sparked doubt, but now, cold numbers confirmed it. 2 of the 3 children Adrian had raised were biologically Elliot's. A collective hush had fallen over the courtroom when the results were read. Adrian had felt his breath leave his body, a sensation like freefall, but he hadn't let it show. The children were still his in every way that mattered. But Lena? She had watched the results unfold like a woman unraveling. Judge Holloway cleared her throat, bringing the room back to order. Given the overwhelming evidence of deceit, fraud, and negligence, this court grants full custody of the minor children to Adrian Wells. The words landed with the force of a final blow. Lena's face drained of color. Elliot slumped in his seat. Judge Holloway continued. Furthermore, this court recognizes that the defendant's attempts to frame Mr. Wells constitute criminal behavior. Charges of evidence tampering and conspiracy to commit fraud will proceed to criminal trial. Adrian didn't look at Lena as the gavel came down. It was over. Outside the courthouse, the cold autumn air bit at his skin, but for the first time in months, Adrian breathed freely. Reporters clustered near the steps, shouting questions, cameras flashing, but he ignored them. His sister Valerie was waiting near his car, arms crossed. "How do you feel?" she asked. Adrian considered it. The fight had been long, brutal. He had lost more than he ever thought possible. But in the end, he had won what mattered. He glanced toward the street, where his children sat in the back seat of Valerie's car, safe, waiting. "I feel like I finally got my life back," he said. And for the first time in a long time, it was true, the storm had passed. The courtroom battles, the betrayals, the relentless fight for truth, all of it was behind him. But Adrian Wells knew that the hardest part wasn't winning. It was learning how to move forward. The house felt different now. Lena's absence had removed the weight of secrecy and lies, but it had also left behind an emptiness that couldn't be ignored. His children, though young, had sensed the shift. They weren't oblivious. They knew something had changed. Adrian made a decision then. He wouldn't let them feel like they had lost the family. He would give them stability, security, and most importantly, love. Work became his sanctuary, but it wasn't the same either. The hospital had cleared his name, the damage from the false allegations finally undone. Colleagues who had once given him wary glances now greeted him with respect, quiet nods acknowledging the hell he had endured. Dr. Evelyn Carter, who had stood by him when the attack started, remained a fierce ally. "You should take some time off," she advised after his shift one evening. You've won, Adrian. Go enjoy your life. The words stuck with him. For so long, he had been in survival mode. He had fought battles, exposed lies, shielded his children from the chaos. But living? That was something he hadn't done in a long time. It started small. Evenings at the youth center, volunteering as a first aid instructor, something his friend Marcus had practically forced him into. The kids were rough around the edges, skeptical of authority, but Adrian saw something in them, lost souls looking for direction. They reminded him of himself. One evening, after a CPR training session, Rosalie Mitchell, one of the social workers, lingered behind. She had been watching him work with the teens, a thoughtful look in her eyes. "You're good at this," she said. Adrian shrugged. "Just doing my job." She smiled, shaking her head. "No, it's more than that. You care. They see it." He didn't respond right away. Caring had cost him before. It had left him exposed, betrayed. But Rosalie wasn't looking at him with pity or judgment. She simply saw him. And for the first time in a long time, that didn't scare him. The commendation ceremony came out of nowhere. The city recognized him for his dedication during the crisis, for the lives he had saved even while his own life was crumbling. He almost turned it down, but Valerie convinced him otherwise. Standing on the stage, looking out at the crowd, he saw familiar faces: his sister, his children, his colleagues, Rosalie. The people who had been there when it mattered. The mayor spoke about heroism, about selflessness, about perseverance. And when Adrian finally stepped up to the microphone, he didn't talk about the awards or the trials he had endured. He talked about second chances. About resilience. About how the darkest moments don't define a person, how they rise from them does. As the applause echoed around him, Adrian knew he wasn't just closing a chapter. He was finally writing a new one. And this time, it would be on his own terms.